What's up, everybody? It's Goddess Z, and I'm back with another podcast episode on Holistic and Spiritual AF. If this is your first time jumping on this podcast, be sure to hit that like, that follow, and stick around all the way to the end of the podcast. If you are into topics such as ancestral wisdom, healing, metaphysics, the divine feminine, we talk about a variety of different things that are going to help you mind, body, and spirit, and to keep that mind, body, spirit integration and flow. Okay. So definitely make sure that you are following me on the respective platforms. And if you are coming back, welcome back, fam. I appreciate each and every last one of you so much. The podcast is growing, like it's astronomically growing now, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Lots of people are leaving questions and comments, and I'm just loving how this podcast, this vision of my ancestors, is really coming to fruition and manifest. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Make sure that you are sharing this out, commenting, asking questions, because that's what helps to make it great. And this podcast airs every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the first and third. I have guests like my guest today. I'm actually going to have Black Sun as our guest, and this is episode 60. We're going to be talking about the Primordial Womb creation stories, the Atlanteans and the origins of humanity. Now, we had to break this down into two parts, y'all, because um, brother is giving some serious, serious soul medicine and cosmic medicine that has to be digested, and integrated into the cellular structure. So this is going to be part one, and I'm definitely going to have him back for part two. And we end at a really good place on this particular episode. So watch it all the way to the end so that when he comes back for part two, you know what the heck is going on. Okay. And let's see, you can always check me out on my website at holisticandspiritualaf.com. That's Ann spelled out, and it has everything over there now, the meditations, classes that are being uploaded, just everything, ways to keep in contact with me. Make sure that you sign up for the newsletter as well so that you stay abreast to what's going on. All right, so that's enough yap about me. Let me get into today's guest. He goes by Black Sun. Once again, the title is The Primordial Womb Creation Stories, Atlanteans, and the Origins of Humanity. Okay, so this week I'm sitting down with Black Sun. He's a cosmic historian, a metaphysical teacher, and a guardian of ancient remembrance. In this powerful conversation, we journey back into the primordial womb, the Divine Mother's cosmic void, where all creation begins. From the sacred darkness, we trace the stories of Atlantis, Lemuria, and the true origins of humanity. We're going to be talking about the rise and the fall of the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, and we're also going to talk about the primordial womb of creation, humanity's origin, and the blueprint of consciousness, the dance of duality within source energy, and remembering our divine lineage and cosmic purpose. Okay. So, as you can see, that is a loaded episode. That's why we had to break this one up into two parts. So, be sure to check it out all the way to the end. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Okay, thank you so much, Black Sun. I really appreciate you for agreeing to do this podcast episode with me. I know my audience is really going to be excited to hear you because you bring in a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you really rooted in everything that you talk about. I've been following you on TikTok for a while now. I guess, probably maybe about 6 months to a year or so. And I'll pop in on your lives and I hear you talking about like some deep stuff like ancient Kemet, alchemy, the history, but really, really going in deep. Okay, so I want you to bring some of that to our audience. But before that, tell me how the journey got started. Like, how did you get on this path of studying these ancient mysteries?
Thank you first and foremost. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you. Invite me to come up here and have a nice, open-minded conversation about some things that can be riveting. So that alone speaks volumes. That you're even willing to have these kind of conversations speaks volumes of, yourself. It takes one to know one. Everybody's not ready for certain things. We all go through stages, so it's not a fault on anybody, but for those who are, you could benefit from this conversation. But to answer your question, in short as possible, I've been doing this stuff for about at least 20 years. Since I'm 41. Since I was about 20 years old, I started to, you know, make it my personal hobby and mission to kind of just look into things and read things. First, I started off taking books from the library and not returning them, but I would read these books, and I would get into certain topics, and one thing would lead me down another rabbit hole. And when I got into spirituality, it's I'm going through the same general navigations as most of us. We go through some type of religion, some type of ism, and you as long as me, I always remained open-minded. So although I had an ism, I was still curious, and I was always looking to connect dots to things. That was just my personal style of going about my research. I was trying to make things make sense, line it up in order. I don't know, no one taught me this, but this is how I wanted to go about it. A lot of people look into things for whatever reasons, but I was interested in the order of things. How do things successively fall in line? Because you can hear about a piece of history and you hear about the Greeks and Socrates and the Greeks going into Egypt. You don't know when the hell these things are they overlapping concepts? Which one came first? Like the Kushite Empire or the Egyptian Empire? Like you hear these concepts, but if you don't have the chronological order, you know, these are truths, but these truths can be confusing if you
Yeah.
don't have timestamps. So, to answer your question in short, I was interested in time stamping things, and that alone is a style of investigative research because you're looking to tie things in where there's gaps, you know. So,
Wow. Yeah, and you know what? I love that. And that's why that explains why you're so highly intelligent because A, you did a lot of reading, and you've been on the path for a while, so you've gathered and amassed a tremendous amount of information. And I think that most of us that are on a spiritual journey, we are seekers. We go down a rabbit hole, whatever our different respective subject or arena is. That was the same thing for me for healing. I truly believe it's about what's inside of us too. That clearly has a lot to do with your purpose and why you're here returned. So, definitely, I love that. So, like a lot of what you talk about on TikTok is you break down the order of things, like you were saying, like the order of creation, so to speak. But a lot of people talk about ancient Egypt. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that, your knowledge with that. Yeah.
um, me personally, I've always had some dibbling dabbling with Egypt because if you're going to come through any type of monastic religion banner, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, either ism is going to intertwine stories of Egypt. So Egypt is always there, right? No matter where you go, there's Egypt. There, even if you're looking into Hinduism and Buddhism, you'll still find that they share some Egyptian motifs, and your heart and your mind can't help but draw you to the pyramids. But what really got me kicked off into Egypt was connecting the biblical allegorical characters with real people in history and connecting who is Moses? Is Moses a literal person or is this like a spin-off type of imitation model? It's like a model but with a different face. Same model, different face. But where's this coming from, right? If there's no grave and there's no proof of these people based on the biblical uh, you know, identification of them, then how could you substantiate a, a character in the Bible?
Mhm.
So these things sparked my interest where there was a possibility that there was a connection there. Just the possibility alone sparked my interest. So to answer your question, that's what made me look into Egypt. It was looking towards that. That was my first interest. And from there, it took me down a whole nother rabbit hole of who's who.
I'll bet. I'll bet there's a lot to unpack in Egypt or Kemet.
Yeah.
So I like that you talked about the characters in the Bible. When you were searching for these characters in the Bible, Moses and some of these big names, what did you find?
Well, interestingly, I was reading a book about the Renaissance, and it was a book. It's a book called the Knights Templar, or excuse me, um, Templars of the East, the Islamic origins of Freemasonry. Um, this is a book that is in the categories of Masonic lodges and libraries, and these books will speak of things in a very different way, not like the mainstream narrative. So at some point in this book, speaking about the Renaissance and the Moors and the 11 universities, this author, it's a dual authored book, and one of the authors references Moses, but he puts slash Akhenaten, and then he goes in a sidebar and starts to go into this thing about the Ark of the Covenant and how this is Egyptian tradition. No other culture had an ark, and I was like, wow, I didn't think about it like that. This ark that they carried, is that a Jewish tradition, or where did that come from? They didn't have that. The Israelites, they're the Hebrews, they
Hmm.
were like nomads. They were just wanderers of the desert. They had sheep, but they were, I always say this because this is a untold truth about the word Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't mean Israelite. It's just that most Israelites were Hebrew. Hebrew means cheap labor hand, right? And
Hmm.
they were wanderers of the desert who looked for jobs, labor, like the Templars, what became Masonry. These Templars were they were a militia, and they were open for business. It's just that the Catholic Church paid them all the time and pretty much kept them in their services. So it looked like they were one with the Catholic Church, but really the Templars were a free agency.
Hmm.
So the so-called Jews or the Israelites, the Semitic people, these people were wanderers. They were nomads. So they didn't have arcs. They didn't have culture and a definitive law and things like that because they didn't stay in one place for too long. So these arcs were traditionally kept with the pharaoh, the king of that time, if he was traveling from, let's say, southern Egypt to northern Egypt, or even outside of Egypt. Later on in the 18th dynasty, they had jurisdiction outside Egypt. Wherever the king traveled, he had a whole conglomeration with him, and they would bring this Ark of Amun. So the Ark of Amun, which was so called the state god of Egypt, Amun just means the unseen. And Tutankhamun, this means the living image of the unseen god. So the Ark of Amun was always carried around by the kings. So this is where the tradition comes from. Way later now, you got 1,000 years later. Supposedly, this Jesus Christ is trying to be forced into history, and now you have this Ark practice. This
Wow.
is coming from somewhere.
Yeah. You you just broke down a whole lot, and a whole lot. When you kept talking about the Templars at night, that they had a movie about that not too long ago. I watched that, but I was thinking about the story in the Bible. Like in the Bible, I remember like they basically try to make the pharaohs or the Egyptians the bad guys, and break that down. What the reasoning and purpose would be behind that, or what you believe.
Very, very good question. One of my most favorite disclaimers that I always say in all my lives and most of my content, if I'm recording, is that there will be I will make sure when I'm going to embellish or give my personal belief. I try my best to speak very academically sound. Even my lives, I have you know um, a whole variety of different pictures and photos that can bring life to the things I'm talking about. But just to answer your question now thoroughly, what do I believe is the reason why they would flip that narrative around like that? Well, it's like a thief telling on themselves. If I take your wallet and I know I took your wallet and you don't know, and you come in the room and you just like, okay, let's go to the store. Wait a second, where's my wallet? And I'm like, shh, I don't know. I don't know. I just got in here. And I start helping you look for it, right? And I'm like, shh. And I pull my pockets out. Shh, I ain't got it. And I go out of the way to show you I don't got it. Most likely, I'm the one that has it. I'm the
Hmm.
least suspecting. So now the narrative. The narrative is that there's a holy man that's Semitic, and there's a big evil African pharaoh, a black man, right?
Hmm.
And he's the wicked pharaoh, right? He's the only time you can agree to make Pharaoh black is now that he's the bad guy.
That's
Now
true.
Pharaoh can be black all of a sudden.
Right. Right.
So um, they do this because the whole game is the reverse, the Antichrist, right? This is where the Antichrist comes from. Your question leads right into the grand finale of this conversation, which is what is the Christ? What is the Antichrist? Right? So the Antichrist is the false sense of Christ, the false sense of God, the false sense of who the Egyptians were. Because who does this false sense need to be subscribed by? Who needs to subscribe to it? You,
Right.
right? So it's your Antichrist. It's not their Antichrist. Their Antichrist is their false Christ, and your Antichrist is their real Christ. You understand? Your real Antichrist is their real Christ. In other words, they designed the Bible to be backwards, it's told in reverse, and they took race out of it.
Hmm.
And this is one of the topics that's one of the most significant in the Bible that nobody looks at the same way they're following Jesus. You're not following the footsteps of the son of Noah, right? The son of Noah, his boat landed, this Noah's boat landed in Georgia, and that is the Caucasus Mountains. And the Caucasus Mountains border Turkey. And Noah had these sons. One of the sons named Japheth, the wicked son. He had a line of sons as well. And guess what? His second son's name was Magog. And his first son, Gomer, he had a son that became Japheth's grandson, Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz is modern day Turkey. So the land of Ashkenaz is bordering the Caucasus Mountains, which is Georgia. That's between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So when this abomination of Atlantis survived this inundation, right? This deluge, this flood of Noah. So poetically written, right? We all know this is allegorical, but there's some truth to it.
Right.
It dropped off this natural impossibility, this Caucasus man. So this Gog and Magog is the roots of the Caucasus race, the Neanderthal, and the gradual process of him refining himself by mixing with humans. How could they say a Neanderthal mixed with humans if they're the first expression of man? Obviously, humans means the original black people that were here, and they
Right.
refined their looks through the mixing. Their their noses became less bulkier, right? Their foreheads less prominent because they were an abomination. They're a genetic impossibility. There's no such thing. That's why it's out of Africa theory. There's no such thing as black Africans migrating to Europe, and because Europe is somehow mythologically so fucking so
You can
cold.
cuss.
Oh, I cuss on here.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
You like,
Thank.
uh-oh, cut loose.
Yeah, sorry about. I was
Be
like, oh,
yourself by all means. Keep going. Don't worry,
yeah.
don't let a cuss word stop you now.
Okay, cool. Um, there's no. It's just impossible, man. That's why it's a theory. There is no way you'll ever get that type of genetic manipulation to happen based on weather. You're never going to get the black man to convert totally into a white man, and then to the point of animal gene and Neanderthal gene. How do you explain that? You can't
Exactly.
explain the white man having Neanderthal ancestry and then also subscribing to out of Africa theory, because that was supplanted by the white power structure as well. Because as long as you thought that white men came from you would subscribe, you would give them the natural disposition of a human being. They're
Right.
mankind. They're a kind of man. So my only I'm sorry for being long with it. Just to answer your
No,
question
no, go.
thoroughly,
Do you?
why would they reverse? It's because you have to take it back to who's doing the reversing. They're telling their story with the Bible, right? This is their holy book, their documented story. You can't trace back the roots of black people. We talk about Atlantis, Lemuria. You can't trace us back.
Right.
Them you can trace back. And so they made this your holy books now. While they made the Dark Ages happen and erased all these books of Kemet and these lost knowledge of the Moors, well, what's the lost knowledge? The story of the two bloodlines, the human originals and the non originals.
Yeah.
And so this flood of Noah becomes the beginning of some people who are known to have survived, right? This abomination of the flesh, this forbidden science, Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolf Steiner. It talks about they knew how to mold a new race. Genetic engineering was a thing. So,
Hmm.
in short, the Antichrist energy is an anti-consciousness energy. That Christ energy is your higher self. That science and the archetype of Christ is 100% African. It comes from the most ancient African archetype of this knowledge of the trifecta self, the observer, the observed, and the actor, right? You're the Isis, Osiris, Ra, quantum, subatomic, atomic. You're all three. But if you are a product of Earth, meaning somebody did something with some genes, incubated a cell, facilitated that, and now you're a byproduct of that, you're of the physical realm. You're an elemental man. You're not
Right.
quantum man. You don't have a primordial soul. Your beginning can be counted. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes sense. And I resonate with things deeply on a spirit level. So quite naturally because of everything you just described. Not to mention I'm an ancient soul. So
Mm-hmm.
everything that you're saying, it resonates with me. And especially when you were talking about the Bible, I remember being a little kid sitting in those ridiculous church things and just really being fascinated by the Old Testament. The Old Testament was where it was at to me because I felt like there was a lot more truth in there. But when you broke down the whole Noah thing and Gog, Magog, and all of that, but you broke down the geographical locations of it, I was like, wow, it was just things was getting activated inside of me because I remember, but I never believed the rest of what they was talking about. And a lot of what they were talking about, it was twisted up and it makes sense. I was always fascinated with the pharaohs and the Egyptian culture as a kid. I was not fascinated with the Hebrew culture that they were showing, like, the
Mm-hmm.
wanderers, like you were saying, that just it didn't resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so you broke it all the way down. You broke it all the way down into what they probably try to interpret as the Holy Trinity, which you just talked about, the quantum, the atom, the being the quantum man, having the soul, being
Mm-hmm.
connected to the cosmos and all of them. And because they're genetically made, not, excuse me, manufactured
Mm-hmm.
with animal DNA, they don't have that. So we got to
Mm-hmm.
twist all of this up and all this history and information was there at some point when they went through all this trouble to destroy all these books and this system that we're living in. It made total sense to me, and I guarantee you, people that are listening, I think that's why my ancestors picked you.
Mm-hmm.
Because they know that you're going to be activating things. You carry the codes to activate certain things in people now that the veil is lifted. So yeah, you're breaking down a whole lot of information in a short period of time where people you just cut out a lot of the study time, you're activated, and now a person knows exactly where to go and where to study. So what you're doing is powerful. And it leads me kind of into what I was going to ask next, because you talked about the high science. Let's talk about Kemet and the spiritual science of Kemet and a lot of what they were doing then, way back then, that's even more advanced than what we're doing now, but we still have access to today, those of us who are quantum and have a soul.
Yeah. It's funny you say it like that because that's exactly the crowd that I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to one crowd only. As you are too. But yes, the most that I can say right now outside of, um, you know, the basic science of chemical mixing, gases, and stuff like that, creating distillation, right? Distillation is something that comes from Egypt, right? Egypt invented beer. So Egypt was known for this beer as well. Egypt was known for many things, but one of those things they were known for was barley, because barley was amongst those five dominant elements of trade. Wheat and barley, and you had other different types of crops that people would use from time to time for trade before currency became a thing. You don't really have the first sign of a gold coin until you have the 18th dynasty, which is the era of King Tut. So until you have a King Tut, you don't really have any records of a gold coin being used in trade. Um, but
Probably because everything was an energy exchange, a current energy currency exchange. There
yeah,
was no
they
need for
had
no
a lot of
physical.
barter.
Yeah.
Exactly, they had a lot of barter, and there was a lot of it was diplomatic, a lot of diplomatic means of reason why things were going with what they were where they were going. But to answer your question, distillation was taken to the next level, like herbal tinctures, creating liquid herbal extracts from bark and root. Like making high concentrated herbal tinctures, because distillation was always a thing since Egypt. But again, the science faded because the Greeks and the Romans came in, and a lot of things changed. But it got taken to the next level with the Moors. The Moors practiced, mastered the art of taking the ethanol, which is the alcohol, soaking the herbs in it for X amount of time, the bark. boiling these barks and these roots to a certain temperature, right, for however long, mixing and stirring. This long, laborious way of root extraction, because root extraction and bark extraction is not something that happens overnight. It's an entire process, you know. So that was something that the Moors um, refined that practice, and they took it to the next level. And so now you have, fast forward, you have this grand America, and what is their biggest moneymaker? Beer, right? That was the phenomenon of Egypt. So the phenomenon of America is beer, right? American beer, alcohol, right? This is like the main port. Well, that was how Moors, that was the Renaissance era. The Renaissance era had, that's when you started to get fine wines and, you know, all these different types of liquors distilled down, and, you know, like the idea of somebody putting their name on a liquor. This is Moorish distillation science. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Yeah. So these were the things, and the book of you know, Templars of the East, and the Islamic origins of Freemasonry. Books like that will, you know, you'll see that you'll find this information in there.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. And I'm just like amazed how you just pull this information out. Like you remember these names, these times, these dates. Like it's not written down anywhere. It's encoded in you. It's embedded in you. It's a remembrance.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I like how you talked about the alchemy too. So there was a lot of alchemy going on as well. Like talk about how and you talked about it a little bit with the Moors, but talk about like the spiritual alchemy that was going on in Kemet and like how that was transferred or being remembered. That's what's happening now today.
Yeah. The last phase you have of a spiritual revolution in Kemet is where this idea of a Moses comes from, which is Akhenaten. He saw that the kings of the 18th dynasty, the high priests of Amun, he saw them leaving the more spiritually sound practices. He saw that the high priests had pretty much lost a lot of their quality in character, and practices became not what they once were. The rituals were not held to a certain standard as they once were. He saw Egypt spiritually and culturally falling off. So Akhenaten shut down these temples, and he, you know, relocated this ancient god essence energy down to the Aten, and they all knew the Aten. The Aten wasn't a foreign god; it wasn't a new god to the Egyptians. It just was one of many. But you know, he wanted to distill it down to that, and he wanted to kind of like clean house. He wanted to shake things up and put things back in order. He wasn't just trying to shut things down for the hell of it. You know, this was Amenhotep III's son. You know, who we call Akhenaten. Um, but to answer your question, what was the spiritual alchemy they practiced? Um, Prior to that, in the best of Egypt, you know, there's a book called, you know, Egyptian Magic. You'll find that by Wells. Um, Wells um, is a good narrator on ancient Egypt. He's a early 1900s narrator. Um, you'll find Egyptian magic there. There's a book called Ma'at Magic by Nima. Ma'at Magic is another good book. It's another, how can I say this? It's not just a good book. It's like a fundamental text if you want to know what Egyptian magic looked like. This is from a company called Wiser Books, and Wiser Books is pretty revolutionary when it comes to um, keeping authentic Dogon, Egyptian, you know, Ifa. You want like some real authentic books. You'll find them in the category or in the catalogs of Wiser Books. WISER. WISSER.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check out a lot of those books, honestly, because I'm growing my library back. So, but I mean, I probably would say at a certain point, like you said, you talking about the end of the dynasty when they had kind of fallen off, basically. I would say at a certain point, they were vibrating at such a high level that they were able to to do advanced things, you know, that are of things that you can do when you're vibrating at a higher frequency. Like us, for instance, right now. We're way off and distorted because of all of the things that were stolen. We're just completely pulled out of spirit. We're, moving in the wrong direction out of purpose. But as the veil's being lifted, more and more people are returning to that level of consciousness, and we're going to experience some of the things. This is what I would think. You probably have the historical, factual information. This is me moving off of spirit and channeling. Like my stuff can't be explained. I just know. So we're moving more. It's going to take time. Clearly, this is not going to be something that's going to happen next year. We're on the other end in the incline. That's what a lot of the work that I do is working with people who are want to reconnect with their ancestors. I always lead people to their ancestors first, their bloodline ancestors first, because they are going to walk them through the path of their lineage. And essentially, as they continue to do their work and study, it takes them to their cosmic family. And we're going to get into that later. So it's my understanding that in Kemet, at a certain point, you know, they were closer to the cosmos level of consciousness than human consciousness. Some of them were walking gods and goddesses. And so, therefore, at a certain point, because they were vibrating so high, their spiritual frequencies were so high, they were able to experience and create things that we couldn't even conceive of in our human little minds right now. Like, for instance, they were able to um, power the city with electricity from using water from underneath the pyramids based on where they were placed on the grid lines and things
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that's what I meant by that. So, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting that you bring that up. I'm trying to find a good place to start. Let me say it like this. There is so many different degrees of Egypt
Hmm.
um, when it comes to dynastic Egypt, and then we have a whole nother side of Egypt that we don't know much about, which is the pre-dynastic Egypt. And when we talk about the peak of Egypt and their spirituality, definitely for sure compared to right now, yeah, it would. If, and Amenhotep the Third, and Akhenaten, King Tutankhamun, these individuals would probably be like feel like an alien to you right now if you saw
Right.
them be put and dropped into this timeline. But the Egypt resembles the end, right? Chronologically, the end of what was before it. Pre-dynastic Egypt was the Typhonian era. That's where the Phoenicians come from. That's why the Egyptians are the fathers of language, because they're the children of the pre-dynastic Egyptian, the Typhonians, and who are the descendants of these Atlantean children. They date their archetype back to Atlantis. Thoth Tahuti is known as Thoth the Atlantean. So the Egyptians never said they built the pyramids. They know that they had repurposed these structures predate whatever we call Egypt. By the time we have a first king, Egypt is on the decline, and it just gets worse and worse spiritually from there. But why? Right?
Yes.
Why is that happening? Right? Because your question is right. Going back all those years compared to now, we would see them on another level. But going back from the 18th dynasty all the way to the first dynasty, we would look that would be a different level. You see, each time the further back you go, the expressions of what it looks like to be conscious takes on a different look, you know. Um, but yeah, um, you had asked about the spiritual practices and why. Your question leads into another angle of where I could go with this answer. The need for a spiritual discipline and a spiritual remembrance and remembering the ancestors, that's not what it always was, right? That
Right.
it became that later. And because you had this, and where did this Hermetic prophecy, because the Hermetic text is Egyptian, where did they get this prophecy of some type of end times, some type of decadent stage for the collective, right? As a whole, black people as a whole, going through these phases of oppression, all this, the bones of Osiris will be resurrected in the West. These are Hermetic terminologies, right? These are Gnostic texts written about the spirit of Egypt will be resurrected in the West. So it's not, people get caught up in the Atlantis and his America Egypt conversation, It's not about either or. It's about and. Everything is about and. It's not is Egypt America. It's just that what you're trying to say is Egypt is a product of the Atlantean science, and the pyramids are Atlantean. They're not Egyptian. True, and Atlantis has its regions near America and on the American continent. That's true, but Atlantis and Egypt don't merge. You see,
Right.
they don't overlap each other. These are successive time frames. You know what I mean? So if people put it in order, they could reconcile this. Egypt is America. No, you'll just find pyramids in America as well. You'll find maybe a sphinx in a Grand Canyon. Supposedly, there's some type of sphinx structure,
Hmm.
if that's there. But pyramids is all over the world. That's Atlantean science. That's Lemurian era. Has nothing to do with this modern dense time. That's why by the time there was a dynastic Egypt, these things were already ancient. They were already ancient to the Egyptians. The pyramids were already an ancient thing to have.
I like that. Because I've been hearing all kind of interesting things like Atlanta is Atlantis.
Yeah, Atlanta is near where that landmass was. There was a landmass there near Atlantis. So I do get that,
Okay.
but we can't. I mean, we know that there was a whole bunch happening here. So at some point, yes. I mean, hey, you that there is a truth to that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
truth to that.
okay. So tell us about, you're saying a lot about the Lemurians and the Atlanteans. Tell us about those errors and how one came into the other.
Fantastic question. The Dogon and the Egyptians say their ancestors came from the star Sirius, Sirius A, Sirius B. They came through the
Sirius
Stargate,
B.
and they're the first soul entities to come into the Earth realm, and they're the originals, right? They trace back the origins of life on Earth, right? The cosmic connection to the cosmic ancestors. So the Dogons are a society that came as a byproduct of the priests from Egypt moving once the Greeks and all the other invasions took place. The high priests were on a mass exodus in different directions, and a lot of them went to North Africa and West Africa, and that's what created the Dogon society. So the Dogons have the same exact science, the same exact Neters and Orishas, the same archetypes, same pantheons, because those high priests are the ones who started the Dogon Society, the high priests of Egypt. Um, so Lemuria is the first phase of Earth for those who initially came through the Stargate, those androgynous soul entities. Your brain has two hemispheres, your soul has also two hemispheres. But at this point, once you got split into the binary expression of male and female, now your soul is split and it's polarized into one of the two hemispheres. But that took place in Atlantis. But the Lemurian era, it was androgynous, it was unified. Like your brain is androgynous, both
Hmm.
hemispheres exist. Your soul was androgynous there. So the entity that was expressed is like glue drying. Think of it like when you first glue something and you set it, it's most malleable in its early stages because you can't come through the Stargate with no damn teeth and bones, right?
Right.
So you have to come through in your causal body, like your seven auric, your auric field has seven layers, right? Your emotional plane, mental plane, causal plane.
Hmm.
You have the vital plane. These are literal different expressions of your body, your archetype, your blueprint. Well, coming through the Stargate, you would be coming through accordingly, right? As the vibratory frequency that matches a Stargate. You're not coming through with skin, hair, you know what I'm saying?
Not like the movies, right?
Exactly. So these Lumerians coming through this Stargate, Earth, when we say Lemuria, we're talking about the first phase of Earth. Think of Lemuria like an epoch, like an era. And
Hmm.
then by the time and time was different. It says in Lemuria that the atmosphere was thicker, trees were bigger, everything was denser. The water was denser, the animals were bulkier, life was bolder, colors were stronger. The rainbow was even damn near tangible, right? But this
Hmm.
was yet still a more etheric stage for the Lemurian, right? The androgynous one. As time set, the frequency dropped because it says at this time in Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolf Steiner And any occult text. The Dogons have the same tradition. The Dogons have the same tradition as the occult texts from Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolf Steiner. As I tell people all the time, these are black people texts. These occult texts are just the white catalog of your African history. And they're telling it in a way that doesn't put you in the literal writing. But if you
To
know
put you
enough of,
in it, it still ain't for you.
yeah, it writes it like you're not there. But if you know your own history, you know, well, this is what this is. Oh, this is the Dogon story. Oh, this is what they were saying. Oh, y'all got this
Right.
from that. Okay. So as time settled, as time went on, the sun and the moon slowly shifted apart from the earth because all things were unified at one point. And as they slowly drifted apart, the temperature of the earth dropped. It was so high during Lemuria that the heat of your flesh body wouldn't stand it. So as heat rises, the vibration rises. Higher vibration means higher temperature, higher heat. So
Mm,
Lemuria, the vibration was so high, it was so hot, so dense that there was no physical body that could exist in Lemuria. You couldn't be solely physical. And as the sun and the moon pulled away, the temperature dropped, which means that the vibration drops, and things became slowly and slowly over time more and more solid to the point where now time goes by, eons, and you reach a solidity stage like glue drying where it starts to hold. And now we have Lemuria. Now the soul has to compromise in this earth environment and it has to split into a binary expression. Now it has to be male or female. It can no longer exist androgynously because the vibrational rate won't allow it. It's too low. It's too low of a rate. So low temperature means low vibration. So now the Atlantean era begins. And that's the first stages of male female.
okay.
That's why you don't have one Adam and Eve. You have multiple because there was multiple Lemurians and there was multiple splitting of individual soul entities.
Okay. And then that would be like the beginning of the human experience, you know?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. Interesting. So you kind of described, I guess, right after the primordial womb entering, phasing in as the androgynous beings. Who knows how long ago that was? And then, like I said, I'm not even going to try to put a
Yeah, you
little
can't.
number, a little human number on it.
Definitely. Definitely.
That's inconceivable. Like,
One hundred.
and then they come into the Atlanteans. So how do they come in? Now, clearly, like you said, there's no need for connecting with ancestors at this time. We don't have all of this distraction, and we don't have anything with an evil plan, to set out to destroy. So they're just able to create and evolve. So how does it go from that to this high advanced society? Um, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful question. How does it go from that to this high advanced society? Now, yeah. So the Atlanteans, they specialized in creation of. Let me say it like this: artistic, um, natural, original creations of things made from the earth and whatever different elemental things that you can construct naturally. This was the art of the day for Atlantis. It was all about inventions. What could you invent that things that could be used and that could take the experience of living here to the next level. That was the original endeavor of the Atlantean, was just invention and next level science. And when we say invention, and we're not talking about no damn caveman, right? We're talking
Right.
about they have endowed knowledge. They're coming through this stargate, so the knowledge and the consciousness is actually declining. The Lemurian is way more advanced than the Atlantean, right? And the Atlanteans way more advanced than the Tartarian, and the Tartarian is more advanced than the modern man we have today. So the further back you go, it gets more and more advanced. So Atlantis, although it's not as advanced as Lemuria, it's still extremely advanced because this is, like I said, the first stages of male female. So this science of this time, this was when things were going to the next level. How we get to this doomsday prophecy situation, the early Atlanteans, who their forefathers were Lemurians, the androgynous ones, that was a whole different brand, right, of Atlantean, the very first phase Atlanteans. So think of it like people who were born in the turn of the century of 18, 1900s versus people who were born at the turn of the century 1900 to 2000s. Totally
Right.
different expression, right?
It's interesting. Yeah.
So the Lemurian, I mean, excuse me, the Atlantean who was first, the first stages of Atlanteans, that was a very extremely high vibrational, extremely high conscious, different in potential and everything that they did. As time went on, the quality descends, but yet it's going simultaneously like this. For example, it says in Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolf Steiner that the Lemurians as well as the Atlanteans did not use their brain. They came with an intuitive knowing. The brain
Mhm.
took a back seat to the mind. The mind is something that exists on a mental plane, which is one of the seven bodies of your auric field. So you exist in the mental plane. That's what the mind means. The mind is the same thing as mental plane where you operate from, but the brain is the receiver. So the brain for the early Lemurian was it was irrelevant. There was no brain that needed to learn something. They came intuitively knowing and they acted from that intuitive knowing. And that intuitive knowing, that natural, like you said, the Akashic Records idea, this is ancestral knowing of
Mhm.
just doing certain things, well, that comes from the traditions of Lemurians passing this down to the Atlanteans and so on and so forth. So they just knew because Lumerians just knew. But then
Right.
as time went on during Atlantis, as the vibrations slowed down, as the Earth and the Sun and the Moon pulled further and further apart, the frequency slowed down, and so the densification of the physical body became uh, more and more of a factor. It compromised how well the soul, the causal body, will dominate, right? Because now your soul has to conform. It's already split, but now as the vibratory rate drops, now your soul takes more and more of a back seat.
Mhm.
Now it becomes the spark within, this divine spark, as opposed to this dominant flame that you just yielded. So now this soul factor, the denser it gets, the less influential it gets over the flesh. Okay, so just think of it like that. So by the time you had the last Atlantean phase, now we have a different grade of Atlantean.
Wow, that's all I got to say. Okay, so is your head hurting? Did you get activated? Okay, because that was a loaded episode in that short period of time for that part one. Okay, so make sure you drink your water, allow that to integrate into your cellular structure and activate what it needs to activate with inside of you. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this podcast. And once again, make sure you following me on either Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, so that you can stay in tune when we drop that part two. All right, peace.